Okay, so the city has had the requirement to harvest rainwater since the mid-90s for the common areas of subdivisions, public buildings, public rights-of-ways, and commercial sites. But these weren't really implemented because both the designers and the city reviewers couldn't quite wrap their head around what water harvesting was. So eventually the water harvesting guidance manual was prepared. That's available free. You can download it from a PDF. Just go to the city website, go to the stormwater section, and there's a PDF. And it's useful both for commercial sites and for residences. It has a lot of information and it's free. Okay. The city did do something radical last fall. It adopted the first of its kind ordinance in the country requiring that commercial facilities meet 50% of their landscape requirements using harvested water. And this takes effect in June 2010. So from now on, in about 5 years, the new Targets and Walmarts and Taco Bells will be doing pretty aggressive water harvesting. Okay. And don't need to go into much detail here, but there's some paperwork they're going to need to submit and some calculations they're going to need to make. And they won't have to make this 50% requirement if we're in a drought, but that's only a localized drought. That's not a regional drought. So drought for purposes of this ordinance is defined at the site. And it's defined as 9 inches or less of rainfall per year. So sites will need their own rain gauge, or they'll need to be looking at rainlog.org to find out general rainfall in their area. And this sequence of slides kind of walks us through some basic data about Tucson. On this slide, the black lines are monthly rainfall. And the striped lines are monthly evaporation, pan evaporation. So you're looking at that and going, wow, look at April, May, and June. We get a fraction of an inch of rainfall and massive amounts of evaporation. This is the fundamental problem of the desert. In fact, it's a fundamental definition of a desert. Little bit of rainfall, a whole lot of evaporation loss. That means when you do harvest water, and you do get water in the ground, you need to mulch it to keep the water in there, because the minute the sun comes out, it's going to suck that water back out. This is a comparison now of rainfall per month with a typical demand for low water use landscape plants. So we get about 12 inches of rainfall per year, kind of a typical low plants in it, uses about 18 inches per year. Once again, you can see that in some months we're pretty close, but in April, May, and June, it's really a struggle to meet those plants' needs, okay? And this is a slide showing how we're telling the commercial users to figure out their water budgets. Instead of letting them assume they get 12 inches of rainfall per year, we've adjusted them down to 6 inches of rainfall per year. That's because we all know it could be raining at your house and your neighbor a block away might not be getting any rain at all. That's localized variability, and you need to plan ahead for that. The other thing that happens is when you're harvesting rainfall, you get a little bit, one of those little sprinkling rains. You can read that in a rain gauge, but in terms of water harvesting and runoff, it's probably not doing much. On the other hand, if you get a really big rainfall, a lot of that is likely overflowing your water harvesting basins or your tank, and it's leaving your environment. So we're telling the industrial and commercial sector to cut off the low part and the top part of that curve and just use the middle part of it in their assumptions. So between those two adjustments, we're adjusting them down to assuming they get 6 inches of rainfall per year. Okay, that's the lower of those two numbers. Now I'm comparing low water use plant demand to that 6 inches of rainfall per year we're asking them to assume. And you can see that demand exceeds supply every month of the year. Now if you look at April, May, and June, we know we're not going to meet that by water harvesting, but if you look at March, which is the next limiting month, you can see that the adjusted rainfall is about 1/3 of the demand. In most of the other months, it's a half or more. So March becomes the limiting month in terms of planning for water harvesting. Okay, next. It turns out that if you take the low water use plant demand in March, and you divide it by that adjusted rainfall figure, you get a ratio of about 3.8 to 1. Now, that is your catchment ratio to the plant demand area. So on this schematic, we're looking down at the top of a tree. The center light part is the tree canopy. The shaded part around it is the hardscape that needs to drain to that tree to water that tree. And that ratio is about 3.8 to 1. And you count the water falling directly on the tree. Okay, next. Now, if we apply that to the demand and supply number, now we're using harvested rainwater, you can see that March, third line across, is now demand and supply are equal. Supply now exceeds demand in all other months except April, May, and June. Because we're only requiring commercial users to meet 50% of their demand. If they build to this specification, they should do just fine in meeting their demand. The reason we set it up this way is when you're looking at a commercial site and you're starting to think about tanking up water at the cost of $2 to $4 per gallon for tanks, and they need 100,000 gallons. Yeah. When you compare that to the potable water savings, their utility savings, here's the tank cost, here's the water savings cost. Never pencils out. So the benefit cost analysis for tanks doesn't really work at the commercial scale unless that water that you harvest allows them to downsize those, those detention basins, usually full of tumbleweeds out back with a chain link fence around it. If you can harvest water in your landscape and therefore downsize your detention basin and therefore make your building bigger, it could be very cost effective, but that may not always be the case. And some of these same principles might apply to your own sites. Storing, for all Jason's and all the enthusiasm about tanks, storing water in the soil is the least expensive place to put it. And if you match that up with a plant palette that is adjusted to our seasonal rainfall patterns, okay, plants know they're going to get watered in November through January or February, and July through September. And they know nothing's going to happen in April, May, and June. So they drop their leaves, they kind of settle in and wait it out. The natives can do that. Drought-adapted plants from South America or Australia are not timed to our rainfall patterns. So if you will use native plants, you can actually accomplish landscape support just using passive water harvesting into dirt and still have a reasonably good landscape. Now, next. We also have a new gray water ordinance. Brad spoke briefly about that. Single-family homes built after June 1st, 2010 will have to be stubbed out for gray water. Okay, next. And those are some of the requirements related to that. This actually affects builders. It doesn't really affect homeowners, except if you're buying a house built after that, you're going to be pre-plumbed and ready to go for gray water. Okay.